is that your house is on fire. Okay? Now, I have some ground rules. Everyone is safe, including you. You have plenty of time to go grab 2 or 3 things. Now, your children are safe and already out of the house. Your parents are safe and already out of the house. Your spouse is safe and already out of the house. As much as it pains me to do this, because some of you would actually go, my pet. Your pets are safe and out of the house. So don't understand that. Go back and burning the house with the animal. I know. All right. So, those ground rules in place, I want you to think for a minute about what you would say. The kids are safe, the pets are safe, the spouse is safe, the parents are gone, okay? All that's taken care of. I'm talking about your stuff. And so what of your stuff would you run back in and grab? Now I tell you, my first thought was Nathan's senior picture. Now that could be because that's the thing we paid the most for in the last, umpteen whatever in order to get it. But and it's a really cool picture because we showed it to all of us. It was so cool. But anyway, that was one thing that came to mind. What were some of the things that came to your mind? This is actually crowd participation here. What you got?
My dresser.
Your dresser. We're going to assume for these purposes that you have a hand truck to take your dresser out with. And it's easy to get it out. All right. Your blanket. Now that's important. I like that.
Bible and the package of special family photos that I keep close to me just in case I'm crazy.
And now we know that Carol has actually planned for this possible event. She's got the Bible and the cool family photos right together. All right, go ahead, Miss Angel. Okay, Glenda's going to bring her stuffed teddy bear. What did you say, Angel? Your clothes. All your clothes? Because if you put on all your clothes at once, that could be tough to get out of the house wearing that, all things considered. Anybody else who's like over the age of 5th grade? Your Xbox. Thank you, Art. Stand up for Art. Your Xbox. Actually, I have to admit that's on my list too. I like my Xbox 360, but not. And another thing came to my mind is we've got this awesome. It's a painting. It's of Laura in her wedding dress. And it's one of those picture painting things, and I would go. I would grab that.
I want to see your pictures.
Wait, you already said your teddy bear. You don't get twice.
You said 3 things.
Hold on me now. All right, Miss Destiny. Your pillows. Please stay me close by. Did I miss somebody back here? Okay. I was thinking of things that I might say. I also, for some reason, thought about it in terms of the office. I got a file in my office that has got all the little cards and special things that the kids have done that they've given to me, or cards of appreciation y'all have given me, and it's all in this file folder in my office. And I'm like, there's one thing in my office I grab. That's what I grab. You're right. There we go. Okay. Now I'm in trouble. All right, Miss Allie, what would you grab? Your Kindle and your Xbox. At least they're small and you can carry them. Jackie?
My insurance policy.
Your insurance policy. A practical voice is heard from. The rest of us are getting all sentimental. She's like, we're going to need this. All right, Nathan.
My birth certificate.
His birth certificate. That way I will not have to drive to Columbus again. Absolutely. All right, so we all have this stuff that we would run and that we would save and that we would grab. The other one that came to my mind was my glasses, if they weren't on my face, because frankly, you are all lost. We can barely tell you apart, so I need these to survive. So we get those things, but the truth is, when you think about it, one of the things that thinking about this does is it kind of reduces us to brass tacks. What's most important to us? What do we really want to grab? And over, it was items of sentimental value. Over and over again, it's things that we knew we would deeply want, or like Jackie mentioned, things that we knew we would need in order to continue on our life. And if we begin to look at our possessions and we look at our stuff from this idea of what we need, of what's truly important to us, it's kind of like when we pack up to move. And all of these things that it seems so important to have we really question whether we want to work hard enough to take them out to the car. That all of these things that were so desperately important in our life, when we get to where we're moving and it's time to unpack, we're too tired to unpack that box and we set it aside and we'll get to it later. And 3 years later, this box of stuff that was absolutely critical to bring is still in a box, waiting to be unpacked later. And it's not entirely our fault. I mean, some of this was done to us by choice. I was reading an article about it. It was talking about how the predictions of futurists 100 years ago, or back at the time of the Industrial Revolution, it was that they predicted that since the Industrial Revolution made possible the production of everything we needed at basically affordable prices, that by 1980 we would only have to work 2 hours a day, since they would have everything they needed except a few consumptive items like food. The major issue of the day would be how to make effective use of all the leisure time we would have. Anybody here trying to make effective use of the more than 2 hours a day that you have to work? Anybody here working 2 hours a day? Yeah, that's what I thought. What happened was that the astute business folks who were concerned with how to get people to buy more when they had already had everything they needed, concluded, in words attributed to Henry Ford, that we must have people value consumption more than leisure. And that from that decision, that move, that heading towards we value consumption more than leisure, we have come to a point where over and over again we've upped the ante on what we need, on what we have to have, on how big our house has to be, how many cars we need to drive, how big those cars have to be, on so many things in our life, what the television has got to look like, what games we have to be able to play with the television, where we need to live, on and on and on. And what we become is a culture that is obsessed with consuming more and more and more. It's not good enough that we have enough to eat. It's the what kinds of stuff we have to eat. And then it's not good enough that we have mostly what we want to eat. Well, then we want to raise the level of our taste. It's not good enough that we go out to a restaurant and somebody else cooks the meal for us and we don't have to cook it or clean it up. It's how good is that food? How high up the food chain does it go? When we drop the name of the restaurant, will somebody else recognize and be excited for us or impressed with what we've done? That we've done it at our jobs, where money has not become a way of providing for our family or providing for our lives, but it's become a measuring stick by which we decide who wins and who loses in the game of life around us. It's become a way that we want that raise and we need that raise, and we feel that we have to have that raise. And some part of it is the constant illusion that happiness is $10,000 away. That if we could just have this much more, then we'd be happy. But a lot of it has become this sense of competition. That I make more than the relative of my gender who I know personally makes. That I make more than my brother-in-law. That I make more than my sister-in-law. That I make more than Uncle Jim. That there's this situation within us where we are almost trained. We move into this habit of desiring more and more and more. And one of the words that we have let go of in our culture is the concept of enough. Of coming to a point when we decide that we have enough. That my house is nice enough. That my furniture is good enough. That my car is good enough. That the food that I'm getting is good enough. That I have enough in my savings and enough in my 401k and enough of all the things that I want. That I've seen enough movies. That I've got a high enough broadband speed, on and on and on. And we come to a point where we as a culture, and me personally, and I think all of us personally, sit around among a bunch of stuff that we have to store and take care of and fight over and figure out how to use, that we never really needed all that much in the first place. Into this reality of the culture that we live in, Jesus steps in and he speaks. And this is what he says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Because no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Anybody else uncomfortable? I'm uncomfortable. I think about Jesus saying that, speaking that to his disciples. I think about the clothes they were wearing, and the fact that they probably didn't have a change of clothes to change into. I think about Jesus wandering around, not even having a home to go to, much less a home like mine with a 2-car garage. I read this and I look at it, and he tells me that I shouldn't be storing up treasures here on earth. And we've got to remember that these verses are kind of all put together. They're all part of one thing. When he's talking about the eye being the light of the body, when you look to the language within it, he's talking about the difference between your eye being single and your eye being divided. Between your eye being focused on one particular thing, and in that focus you actually can see and understand and comprehend and accept what you're seeing, versus your eye being divided and trying to look at two things at once. And if any of you have tried to look at two things at once, or the joys that we have going into the doctor's office where they're like, okay, now look with this eye, now look with that eye, and then they put your 2 prescriptions funky with the little thing, and you're like, I can't see anything, and I feel like my head's about to split in half. When we try to look at two things at the same time, when we try to do that, that our eye becomes weak, and we can't even understand what we're seeing. That we're skimming past the details and end up with no information from either of the two things that we're looking at. And so this is all centered around that verse 24 where he says that you can't serve two masters. And understand that Jesus is not saying you shouldn't serve two masters, it's not going to be helpful. He's not saying, well, you shouldn't serve two masters because only God is worthy of your life. He's saying in no uncertain terms, you can't serve two masters. Even if you try to serve two masters, no matter how hard you try, it will never, ever work. You will never be able to actually serve both. That the truth is that you will serve one and pretend to serve the other. That you will actually serve one and actually respect one and actually care about one, and you'll fake it with the other master. You'll pretend. You'll act as if it were true that you were serving them and you cared about them, but in your heart, you'll despise them. You'll hate them. You'll walk away from them. And Jesus is specifically applying it to the concept of following God. And he says, look, you can't chase after God and chase after wealth at the same time. You can't make God your end-all be-all and make wealth your end-all be-all at the same time. It's not going to work. Not that it'll be psychologically bad for you, not that it will cause you problems, but that it just won't happen. And that what will actually happen is you'll end up chasing one or the other. And human beings being who they are, us being the way that we are, we're going to end up chasing wealth because it's easier than chasing God. We're going to end up chasing our stuff because it's more present, it's more noticeable, it's more a part of our life than God who is up in heaven and who is speaking to our heart and whose word is here and whose people we know, and yet God who doesn't break down, and then you have to fix it. As we look at this passage, Jesus tells us, he says, the difficulty here is what we treasure. The difficulty here is what we hold on to, what we most value. And he's saying that we need to stop storing up treasures here on earth and store them up in heaven instead. And the reason he gives for it is this idea of our eye being one, this idea of being focused on the right thing, being focused on God. Because he says where your treasure is, your heart is. And once again, notice, he's not saying your heart's likely to follow your stuff. He's not warning and going, well, you need to be careful because you don't want your heart to get too attached to this, so you need to attach it to something else. He's laying down a simple cause and effect. He says, where your treasure is, your heart will go. Not should go, not shouldn't go, but will go. And that if we treasure, we store up treasures here on earth, it's going to focus our heart here on earth. And that there's nothing that can break that. We can't, by any amount of Bible reading or pious praying or getting down on our knees, change the reality that if our treasures are here on earth, our heart will be here on earth. We cannot have our treasures here on earth and then somehow find some other operative way to operate so that our spiritual life is focused on God and our physical life is focused on our stuff. Jesus says that where your physical life is, where your heart is, that's going to be where your treasure is. And if your treasure is in this world, no amount of praying is going to change your heart until you change what you treasure. Until you change what you're storing up. Your heart's going to remain focused on the world instead of on Christ. Your heart's going to remain focused on what more can I get and how can I preserve what I have instead of being focused on Christ. When he talks about laying up treasures here on earth, Jesus also gets very practical. He says, look, don't you understand that whatever you have on earth can be taken away? We all learned that to our detriment in 2008. We have been taught as a culture to value and look at our 401k and think, this is going to be my salvation when I get older, and we watched it disappear. We all have been there where we buy something new, and just one day after the warranty expires, it breaks. And where we bought it from is like, well, that's really not our problem. You should have spent the money on the extended warranty, and then we would have helped you out. Though, of course, then it goes to the end of the extended warranty and then breaks. Or we've all had those things that we were like, this is what I'm going to buy. I'm saving my money. I'm hoping for it. I'm waiting for it. Once I get this car, once I get that house, once I get this particular piece for the kitchen, once I get that piece of artwork, once I get this particular thing that I've been hoping for and saving for and wanting, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be able to be done. Once I collect that last film I was looking for, I collect that last little toy car I was looking for, or whatever it might be, or I set up that one more train system, whatever it might be, we find this thing and we say, if only I can get that, then I'll be happy. But the problem is that we're treasuring that thing instead of God, and our heart follows it, and it, just like every other treasure on this earth, moth and rust destroy. Thieves break in and steal. We cannot hold on to the things that we have. So part of the argument that Jesus makes is he says, look, that grabbing hold of the treasures of this world is kind of like when I grabbed the water and I dribbled it out through my hands. We can't hold on to them. They don't stay with us. And even if they do stay with us, how many of you bought a computer in the last 5 years? Raise your hand. You bought a computer in the last 5 years. Still completely, perfectly top of the line, right? Absolutely the latest thing, right? No. You bought it and it was obsolete. You walked out of the store and they said, well, actually, we've got a new version coming in next week. And why don't you come? I still remember when Laura bought her iPad, and she's like, I finally have an iPad, and a week later, here's the iPad 2, released everywhere. I was like, really? Wait a week. The treasures that we chase after, they aren't even worth the effort we put in because they never last. We can never hold on to them. And so what Jesus is doing, and part of it is he's making a practical case. He's saying, look, everything we treasure here on earth dies, decays, falls apart, is destroyed. But the things we treasure in heaven, they're preserved forever. That if we lay up treasures in heaven, then they're going to go on and on and on, and we're never going to lose them, and they're never going to be gone, and they're never going to rot. They're going to be held forever by God. Now, the thing about it is that treasures are harder to lay up in heaven. The Scripture tells us that we lay up treasures in heaven when we choose to act in love to another human being. And we boost that relationship with them through loving them and treating them. He tells us the treasures in heaven are laid up when we choose to serve God. When we do things like go and teach the kids in vacation Bible school, or volunteer to help out our neighbor, or volunteer to work in the church or in the school or in something else is going on, that when we do things for others out of the Spirit of Christ, that's one way that we lay up treasures in heaven. That when we give financially to His work, we lay up treasures in heaven. Now the thing about all of these things, about all of the stuff that we can lay up in heaven, is it's radically different from the stuff we can bring together here on earth. The stuff here on earth, we can go ahead and make a little wallow of it and sit in our wallow and go, oh goody, I got my stuff. And it's for me. But the stuff that we lay up in heaven, the treasures we lay up there, are for other people. They're things that we do here for someone else. They're things that don't benefit us, that don't give us anything more than a passing sense of feeling good about having done it. The truth is that it's harder to lay up treasures in heaven, frankly, because I am selfish. And so are the rest of you. We want to be able to have something to show for the effort we put in. And having that deferred until someday when we go to heaven, instead of being something we can look at over there on the fireplace mantle, is much more difficult. Much more difficult. Jesus tells us that our heart follows our treasure. What He wants to have be our greatest treasure is our relationship with Him. That relationship with Him is founded in that basic reality that God created us to love us. And that He loves us forever with all of His heart. And that He has a plan for our life that is perfectly His plan. And somehow at the same time exactly what we need to do. The problem is that most of us don't experience that. Most of us do not experience the love of God on a day in and day out basis. Most of us do not experience a sense of intimacy or closeness with Him. And the reason for that is because God is someone we've run away from. That we've chosen to disobey God. We've chosen to say, God, I see your way, I understand your way, but I'm going to do it my way, thank you very much. And in so doing, we've created a separation between us and God that we cannot fix. And even if we could, within 24 hours after it got fixed and we were next to God again, we would decide that there was some other way, that God was mistaken about the universe and we were correct, and we would run away again. That separation from God, if it continues on after our death, is an eternal separation in hell. And God is not happy with that. So He did something about it. He sent Jesus to come and to walk this earth, and to live the life we should have lived, that perfect life, and to die the death we should have died, one that paid for the sins of the world. And Jesus set it up that through His sacrifice, through our trust in His sacrifice, that gap between us and God could be bridged by Him. That break in our relationship with God could be fixed by Him. That He paid the cost. And He set it up so that all we need to do is to transfer our trust from ourselves, our own good deeds, our own hard work, our own ways of trying to get it right, and to trust instead in His perfect love and His forgiving death. To trust instead in the forgiveness that comes from Christ. And when we make that decision to put our trust in Him and what He has done, God has promised that our relationship with Him will be restored, and that we will be able to go to heaven and be with Him forever when we die. Now, if we've made that decision, doesn't it make more sense to store up treasure where we'll enjoy it forever with God, rather than storing up treasure here where we have another week, another month, another 5 years, another 10 years, another 50 years? And there's probably nobody in here who's got another 100 years to enjoy it. Or to store up that treasure with God when we get to enjoy it forever. As I mentioned at the beginning of the service, I'm going to do Marie Spivey's funeral this afternoon too. Having her pass away this week really brought back to my heart the truth of this passage and what it addresses. Because the reality of the world is that one day we are all going to leave it. That there is a 100% mortality rate on life. And that despite the fact that we are all certain that our own personal world will continue forever, and we live as if that were the case, and I understand, and I'm saying I do it too, that I don't believe I'll ever actually die. They'll come up with great scientific advances that'll keep on going, and it'll never happen. Then the truth is that one day we will. And we will leave behind all our stuff. All our cars, all our Xboxes, all of our hobbies, and our golf clubs, and our pets, and our everything else. And we'll go and we'll stand before God. And He loves us. And if we put our trust in Him, there's no question of us being accepted. There's no question of us being cared for. There's no question about whether or not heaven's going to be awesome. But there is a reality that Jesus lays before us. That if our life has been one of piling up treasures in heaven, our heart will be ready for it when it comes. And when we walk through that door, God will have it waiting for us. And that if we focus our lives here on earth and our treasures and our hearts here, then we'll be torn away from the things that we've chosen to love and barely willing to be there with Christ. My encouragement to you today, and my encouragement to myself, is to check your eyesight. Figure out what you're focused on. Am I focused on the things of this world, and are those my treasures? And if they are, to step back. To let them go. And to store up those treasures in heaven that come from following God and giving to God and loving other people in the name of Jesus. At this point, we have time for a hymn of decision. It's an opportunity to come and to speak with me if you wish to.